So I already wrote this many pages of notes. And that was me trying not to make that many notes. And I also made notes in my Kindle app about the On Dialogue book. So it seems everything I perceive is an act of dialogue, as some kind of new perception is given voice. I would say that Krishnamurti has influenced my life the most, and the second person is probably David Bohm, who engaged in dialogue with Krishnamurti. He's just such a clear perceiver and thinker. And I actually feel like map consciousness is a dialogical consciousness. It's perceiving and giving voice to those perceptions, but the thing is, when one connects with that consciousness, one is generally in those perceptions alone, sharing those perceptions with oneself. And if they're not mirrored and bounced back between people and shared, then they don't have as much meaning as if they're shared perceptions, or perceived and then shared and had and engaged in via dialogue. And I think it's maybe the dialogue process that is that energy, and that energy dissipates and wears out if there's no engagement, because normally thought processes are to divide and categorize and things like that. But dialogue is to share meaning and unite and join and merge. And I was talking about before, well, what is this emergence? It's an emergence of dialogue, and that is something that needs to be shared between people. And part of my self-dialogue is just realizing that I have all this stuff to say or engage in dialogue about, but I don't necessarily, at the moment, have people willing to engage in dialogue, or perhaps willing to engage in dialogue about mental health. And maybe mental health and mental wellness is actually about being able to engage in dialogue. And maybe the process of mania leading into psychosis is an attempt to engage in dialogue. And that attempt usually fails, because we're sharing things that are meaningful. We're sharing new memes. We're making new meanings, new perceptions. We're seeing things that other people don't see. And the thing they don't see generally is the meaning of things, or that they have different meanings than the ones that we've been programmed to ascribe to things through thought. So I feel like this energy is attempting to get us to engage in dialogue about meaningful things, and seeing the meaning of our perceptions and sharing that. And I've shared how in the beginning there's so much meaning, and everything feels so meaningful that one is saying so much, and it can be nonsensical. But through dialogue it can become sensical, and it can become sensate, in that other people can sense what you're saying and perceive it too. And even though some of it's really out there, that's where dialogue comes in handy, in order to prune out some of those perceptions that are too far beyond the meaning, or maybe they're meaningful but not really something to be engaged with and energized. So they might be temporarily meaningful, but not energetically meaningful in the long term. And I've talked about, say, perceiving meanings of potential aliens or whatever, but what is the point in engaging in dialogue along those lines? So some of the elements that come up in a dialogical consciousness, if engaged, can become monological and then one goes towards something that is a psychosis, perhaps. And Dr. Daniel Fisher talks about how psychosis is a monologue. It's perhaps being caught in some of those memes and perceptions that are isolating. So I do always find it interesting when I engage in something and then read about it after, as if it was meaningful. And I'm also seeing that map consciousness going into that other dimension of consciousness, which is just a different algorithm. It's a different way of calculating, is actually a navigation problem, or it could be a navigation paradox, because Dr. David Bohm talks about paradox versus problem. And we have the navigation through thought, but now we also have this navigation through a different algorithm of perception and meaning making, and attempting to share those meanings. So normally we share our thoughts, which are pretty limited, but if we start to share the meanings that we're seeing, and I've been in self-dialogue about the meaning of mental illness and how it's a meaningful process and a meaning-making process and a memeing process, a re-meming of the brain, new memes, and not just memes but weems. So all these things I've already talked about with myself that I've seen. And beyond memes, maybe there's semes, S-E-M-E, things that we see that are turned into dialogue. And TED Talks talk about ideas worth spreading. Well, if we spread ideas, they get absorbed, and if they get absorbed but not really seen, then they're just more like viruses. And the more ideas we spread, and if they're just absorbed and accepted with a smile and a nod and attempted to be turned into patterns of action, that's like having sound viruses in the brain that are just vibrations that we play in order to sort of pattern our consciousness. Whereas when we see something for ourselves through direct perception, it actually grows our actual brain cells. So you can think of it as the cells of our body growing versus viruses in our body spreading. We need nutrition to grow the cells of our body properly. We need perception to grow the brain cells properly. Otherwise, we just have sounds vibrating around in the form of ideas that we've absorbed, turned into our own voice in order to reverberate those to have some kind of pattern of action. And those sounds actually get in the way of our seeing with our eyes, our direct perception, so we don't actually need any of these sound virus patterns. And I'm already at 10 minutes. I'm trying to keep it to 10 minutes right now. I could probably talk on 10-minute videos forever. Garbage, crap and junk containers. This factory looks like it's actually open, which is a first. What is this? So ugly.